Hazelwood Witch is welcome. So we have gotten to 1,000 subscribers, which means that I will be doing a giveaway at the end of this video, so stick around for that. First, I wanted to go into how to read energy and spell ingredients. So not just looking at the correspondences, which are in a book, but looking at what you have in front of you and sort of like taking in the information and then seeing how it makes you feel or what comes up for you. So this can get into some really interesting things. I mean, the world's your oyster when it comes to spell ingredients, really, and using odd spell ingredients at that makes a lot of sense to me. I know off the bat, something like a lizard tail might not make a lot of sense, right? But if you kind of inspect and this is where I'm sort of like looking at ingredients. Okay, you have your typical correspondences, but when you pick up something from outside that isn't like an herb, or if it is an herb, what are the circumstances surrounding this object? So that's an extra layer that you can use to pull information and to create spells and ingredients that that might be useful for you. All right, close your eyes and let's do a quick gut check. Just tune in and notice the difference. Catching a leaf before it hits the ground versus when you pick up off the ground. Your favorite herb picked under a full moon versus midday sun. A hummingbird nest nestled in a cozy hideaway versus one lying on a sidewalk. If you look at yourself as sort of like a center axis, you are a relational being. You cannot exist in a vacuum. Every time you interact with something, you're creating some kind of system, like a give and a receive. Think of it as like a figure eight between two people, between you and a chair, between you and a rock, between you and whatever it is. You're actually feeding each other. So when you change, that other thing is also forced to change, even if it is a rock. And it in and of itself is probably not going to change, at least not by much. However, your perspective will change when you make a shift. So, and that is where the transformation and the power lies in working with ingredients in a spell. So what does that look like in real life? So a lot of it is just about knowing yourself and being able to identify like what's going on inside of you when you are creating a spell, because that is constantly changing from day to day, from hour to hour, from minute to minute. So part of like what's important to tap into when you're creating a spell is your relationship to something and how it might be similar or different than it was in the past. You can say a correspondence to rosemary. It means protection, it means cleansing, it means whatever, fill in the blank, whatever you're charging it for. And that is a constant, but what does change is you and how you relate to it. So like, the rosemary you buy at the store might have a different feeling to you than the rosemary that you pull out of the garden. Your relationship to it is gonna be different. One out of the garden is likely going to have a much stronger impression to you, much stronger story around it than the one at the grocery store. So that is something to take into account, is that added extra layer surrounding whatever it is, excuse me, that you're putting in your spell. I happened upon a cat fight and I watched these two cats, battling it out, and after they both ran away, there were tufts of fur all over the lawn. I picked it up and put it in a jar. And that is then going to be charged with aggression, vulnerability, loss, fire. If I had fur from, I don't know, a grooming, let's say, the cat was being groomed and I had fur left over from this, then it would have a very different story around it. It would have a very different energy. It would have cleaning, wiping away, renewing, getting rid of. That would be the story surrounding that ingredient. So to me, when I'm looking at an ingredient, I'm looking for the story surrounding it. What's happening around this object or this thing that is informing how I view it. Because I am the only thing I can control when I'm doing a spell. Knowing, okay, here are my correspondences, and not just the correspondences you look up online or in a book or whatever, but my correspondences around how I view or how I interact with this particular object, the story around it. Because that's what we're doing in spells. We're taking energies, different kinds of energies, putting them together and creating an outcome with sort of the commingling of these things, right? And that affects us. That affects us. That affects your relationship to the world around you. So we become these conduits. This is my perspective on it. People are not going to agree on it. But this is my experience with it. The object might hold energy from someone I love dearly, and I need love in something. I mean, it's great to put on your altar, especially if you're doing a love altar, you know? Or this particular necklace, for instance, is from an ex-boyfriend, and I love the stone. It's my favorite stone in the world. It's a beautiful labradorite. However, you know, when he gave it to me as a gift, I had a very different feeling about this than I do today wearing it. It's a very different experience. Taking those things into consideration, especially if you're a feeling, intuiting, and sensing person rather than relying on your intellect for everything. Look, we're all combinations of thinking, intuiting, feeling, and sensing. That is a given. But we each have our preferences in terms of how we take in things from the world and how it affects us. We each have our own sort of like personal stamp on how we interact with the world, and knowing those things is really important in how you put a spell together. If you're super intellect based, you're going to have a different experience and a different way in than if you're a feeling based person, an intuiting based person, a sensory based person. If I were to look at a feather and use it in a working in some way, I would look at the color, I would look at the size, I would look at how it makes me feel, I would look at where I found it, how I found it, and all of those things would inform how I used it. You could have a very specific ingredient, like a feather before it hits the ground, catfight fur, broken eggshells from a wild bird versus, you know, eggs from a carton that I bought at the store from a chicken. Snail shells. I have snail shells that I have found in the garden, and I have snail shells from snails that, you know, were my companion for a little bit and then passed away, and those have very different feelings to them too. You know, the one I found outside has very little emotional attachment to it, whereas the ones that I have collected from the ones that were inside with me have more emotion attached to them. Using flowers that you found on the ground versus flowers you find on a plant and that you pick off. Very different things, to me anyway. To me, if I find and use a flower that's on the ground, I actually prefer that. I don't actually love picking flowers off of a plant. It's the animist inside of me. If I can use a flower that I found on the ground, that to me feels more respectful than taking it from the plant. So if I take it off a plant, there's also something that saddens me about that. I have collected seagull footprints from sand, exoskeletons from butterflies and bugs that I've found. I recently found a lizard tail, which is now in my stash. My point being is, when selecting ingredients, there's a whole story and energetic imprint that is already there. And just noticing and taking stock of sort of like second level down will help make spells more specific. If this speaks to you, I would love to know what odd ingredients you've put in spells before, and if any of this resonates in terms of like how I've said what I've said. So we're still collecting money for Morley's Friend Fund, and we will be donating $100 soon. We are getting close. I'm facilitating a guided visualization live stream once a month over on my Patreon, plus offering once a month printables and just behind the scenes stuff. I would love to have you over there and connect there too. Let's see who wins the bag. Yay!
Yeah, congratulations, Stephanie Danger. I'll be in touch. All right, and here's some more gut checks. And this example is inspired by Heather from the Wild Forest Witch, because I saw her use a spider web in one of her spells. An abandoned spider web waving in the breeze versus a web still in use. A seagull footprint in hot sand versus in mud. And a wriggling lizard tail versus a still lizard tail.